Vasistha continued. The individualized consciousness, the mind, has arisen in the Supreme Being, O Ram. It is both different and non-different from the infinite consciousness, even as a wave is different and non-different from the ocean. To the enlightened, the mind is the absolute Brahman and not else. To the unenlightened, the mind is the cause of repetitive history. To the enlightened, the mind is the absolute Brahman and not else. The mind here it's been described as the individualized consciousness, although there's no such thing, there's only consciousness. But there's the notion of the individual has arisen, and the notion that the individual is experiencing everything has arisen. So here in this case the mind could be regarded as the organ by which everything is apprehended or perceived. And in that apprehension there is only what is perceived, there is only what is going on. In that apprehension there isn't the apprehension plus the object of apprehension. There's only the object or whatever is going on, and that is described as the absolute Brahman. Now it's when the individual mind gets caught up in what is going on, that's when we've got samsara, when the mind is blindly and automatically caught up in what it's apprehending. And not only in what it's apprehending, but in what it understands that it's apprehending, what it's trying to comprehend. The unenlightened mind tries to comprehend by making categories and relationships between categories. When dualistic concepts are used by us, O Ram, it is only to facilitate instruction. The division is not real. The absolute Brahman is omnipotent, and there is nothing which is outside of it. Omnipotent means all-powerful, which is the case, although power doesn't convey quite the right feeling, I think. It's the only power. It's the sole power. It's all there is. There's nothing outside of it. It is his own power or energy that pervades all things. It is all things. In embodied beings, it is the Cit-sakti, the power of consciousness or intelligence. It is motion in air, stability in earth, void in space, and it is the power of self-consciousness, I am. So it's not only all things, it's the characteristic of all things, and it is the power of self-consciousness, I am. And this is one way of getting to it, by exploring what is meant by I am. It's the power of self-consciousness in created beings. It is the I am. This is what the sage Ramana Maharshi instructed his followers to pursue. What is this I am? Yet all this is nothing but the power of absolute Brahman. It is the power of disintegration, the power that causes grief in the grief-stricken, and the power that causes elation in the joyous, and the power that causes elation in the joyous. In the warrior it is valour, it is the power that triggers creation, and the same power brings about the dissolution of the universe. The jiva is at the junction of consciousness and matter. And because it is a reflection of the absolute Brahman, it is said to be in Brahman. So the jiva is also the individualized consciousness. And it's saying here it's at the junction of consciousness and matter. Well, the jiva is the embodiment of the cognitive process. It's what creates the notions of matter, of physicality, of inertia. The jiva is at the junction of consciousness and matter, also in the sense that it can direct itself to the physical world, sensory world, or it can direct itself to its own nature, which is pure consciousness, or Brahman. See the entire universe, and also the I, as in I am, as the absolute Brahman. For the self, which is Brahman, is omnipresent. It's what lights up the whole field of experiencing. There isn't a separation between the experiencer and what's been experienced. We say I experienced this or I experienced that, and we thereby create a separation between me and what I'm experiencing. But there's only the experiencing. And it's the same with everything, and that's why it's omnipresent. It's all awareness. Awareness of what's going on. And in that awareness of what's going on, there is only what's going on. When that self thinks, it is known as mind. It is nothing but the power of the absolute Brahman, which is non-different from Brahman. In other words, the whole cognitive process whereby we create notions of the world, of self and so on, is non-different from the absolute. It's like the waves on the ocean. In it, all this arbitrary division into I and this are but apparent reflections. The very reality of the mind is Brahman alone. Here and there, now and then, this power of Brahman makes manifest one or the other of its powers. But all this manifestation is but the apparent reflection of the power of Brahman, not a real creation. Thus creation, transformation, existence and destruction are all brought about by Brahman in Brahman. It is nothing but Brahman. The instruments of action, action and the doer, birth, death and existence, all this is Brahman. Nothing else is, even in imagination. Delusion, craving, greed and attachment are non-existent. How can they exist when there is no duality? When bondage is non-existent, surely liberation is false too. Holy Sir, Rama asked, Holy Sir, you said that when the mind thinks of something it materializes. Now you say that bondage does not exist. How can these be reconciled? Vasistha replied, O Ram, the mind in a state of ignorance imagines bondage. The bondage exists only in that state of ignorance. Just as the dream objects vanish when the dreamer wakes up, all these hallucinations known as bondage and liberation do not exist in the eyes of the enlightened. So the enlightened has gone beyond any notion of bondage and liberation. Again, they're another duality which we can step aside from. Bondage and liberation are a result of this cognitive process, which we can direct the attention towards and get caught up in such notions, or we can direct the attention back to itself and allow it to rest in the pure awareness of the field of experiencing. So this has been a little contemplation on the mind, which followed on from the previous chapters. Here we've got the mind as Brahman, whereas before it was seen as perception and action.